So it's kind of provocative caption for my presentation: building an efficient backdoor distribution system from a national CERT, right? But the idea behind this stuff is actually somehow related to active cyber defense as well. So it's doing the good stuff, not the bad stuff. The material is created by me and my good colleague Arturs Daniļevičs, who is also present here. So he did quite a lot of technical work here behind this story. So why we actually did it, and what were the techniques, and what actually is behind this stuff, I'll explain during my presentation. But this is also, I would hope that it is an encouragement for you all to do your own research. And sometimes one small incident, sometimes just a spam message, can grow out into a quite big thing if you look close enough. So this story is about backdoors. So we were trying to find the alpha bad guy who is actually orchestrating some other bad guys, and this happens quite a lot in Wild West of cybersecurity. And current focus only is on PHP. So techniques used in PHP to hide backdoors in existing web shells or backdoors. It could be also applicable to other languages, but it was not the focus of this research in particular. So there are quite a lot of researches already on the internet available. They are dissecting web shells and trying to understand how they work, how to fight with them, etc. This is not the story about that particular case, but those who are actually orchestrated by someone else. So there are minions who are script kiddies or just random hackers exploiting known vulnerabilities on web, and sometimes they use web shells or code that is freely available on GitHub and somewhere else, and they implement it just to make their life easier. But that code was created at the first place by someone, and that someone might be also with not the brightest motivation or brightest thoughts behind that, and he might be able to plan some tricks that he is interested in. So basically, it is a kind of way of looking on supply chain problems that bad guys also have. Or food of chain, if you will. So why do that? As I will explain during my presentation, it came out just from one small incident, one compromised website, and it grew quite a lot. So altogether, at the end, it was hundreds of compromised servers from one incident, and we started it just to understand what are the techniques used by the attackers to hide their backdoors in malicious code. So to be honest, it was quite time-consuming because you actually have to look at the code, because the usual techniques to find some badness in already malicious code do not apply. They try to evade detection, etc. And also, as a national CERT, we're also interested in collecting the data like indicators of compromise, which are emails, domain names, some other HTTP protocol specifics that might be useful for sensor networks, command and control specifics, and etc. And maybe, just maybe, we might be able to find the master of them all, like who is actually orchestrating the backdoor. This is freely available for download, quite well-known web shell, which is called WSOShell. A lot of hackers are using it, and this one is actually a fork from the original, but it is used a lot, and I guess the authors, they also have a sense of humor, so they put this visual element like Department of State, United States of America. Of course, it's not their product, but still. So it's used quite a lot, and guess what? It's backdoored as well. If you take a close look at the code, you see a lot of obfuscation routines, and if you de-obfuscate them layer by layer, you can find what actually is happening there, and it's an interesting finding for us. You know, this really widely used backdoor is actually backdoored, and the information from those infected or compromised machines, servers usually, it is being sent to mail@mail.ua. Mail.ua is owned by Mail.ru, and well, I'm not trying to speculate here, but I think you have to be very closely affiliated with this mail provider to get the access to mail@mail.ua. I'm not sure if that is their software product or no, but the information is being dispatched to this address definitely. So by investigating that at the first glance, it might seem that there's some master, the big one, the big guy who is mastering all the minions. But spending some time on this research, we found out that it's not actually like that. So it's more like Wild West, and they are constantly fighting with each other, taking back the control from each other and pushing them out. The other guys are getting back in, etc. And from one point of view, it's also interesting for CERT to gather more indicators of compromise, because they produce them during the fight, if you can call it that way. So the main methods were, as I mentioned, static code analysis, but to ease the work, because our intention was to analyze as much web shells, backdoor web shells as possible. We also created some custom tools during the research to deobfuscate the code, to detect what kind of obfuscation is used, decompress if the compression is used, etc., just to make it a little bit faster, and extract some IOCs like emails, host names, callback functionality, artifacts, and etc., and some other interesting patterns. So the typical web shell, it usually contains a functionality or code artifacts that allow a remote attacker to execute the commands or execute the code, PHP code itself. And usually some kind of obfuscation is also used, just to be able to evade some techniques from administrators like AV. And apparently what we found out, some AV solutions on server side, they're effective. And I'll explain why we have come to this conclusion. So common obfuscation techniques that were used in most of those backdoors is, of course, base64, encode gzip, and sometimes backdoors are hidden in the plain sight, so you have to look really closely at the code to be able to find them. And sometimes it's a technique that you might call maybe a code spray, that the backdoor code is actually sprayed across the web shell code, just to make it more evasive or not that easy to find, which also takes quite a lot of effort to understand that it's actually there. So callback functionality, the old ones, and quite a lot of them are still used. The old web shells, they are backdoored with PHP mail function, just as I mentioned with this mail UA case or WSO web shell. And this functionality is just introduced to gather information from the compromised machine, like host name, IP address, the minion IP address, or the or the guy who thinks he is controlling the web server, compromised web server. And sometimes commands executed and other interesting artifacts, which for some reason are also interesting for the main guy who actually dropped his backdoor in it. And so, as you might be aware, that functionality in nowadays, in most cases, it's limited because of the spam abuse, and this function PHP mail is also in most cases limited or disabled. So that's why they, in newer cases, they use this file get contents and other interesting tricks. So another interesting finding is that, which also indicates that it's a Wild West out there, and bad guys have their supply chain integrity problems as well, and we can learn from that, is that we found that in some cases web shells were backdoored with even 3 different backdoors. And from what we suspect, it might be even 3 different actors who were doing that. And again, it's kind of inheriting bad OPSEC from the previous guy just by reusing the code, which we also do, right? We also reuse the code in our daily operations, which is inevitable, basically. So, same problems also for them. And in latest cases, we found that it's even mixed function calls and multiple layers of obfuscation and those spraying techniques that I described before. These are some examples of hiding in plain sight. So a tricky way of bypassing the web shell authentication and execute the code. Here you can see it's quite simple functionality, but if you have already a code which has to be somehow audited with a malicious intent, so that the intent of the code is malicious by definition, and then there's another piece of code which is again malicious, sometimes it's quite tricky to spot that. But the results are quite interesting. Okay. So how did it all started? So this is the encouragement part. So I hope that you also would be willing some time to share your experience from your researches, and again, just a small incident can be trigger for a bigger thing and a research. And I like this. I like to quote our colleagues from Luxembourg. There are no small incidents, and this, I think, it's true. It depends whether you have time to dig deep enough. And it's all, for us, it all started with one compromised web page with a backdoored web shell. So we found out that the master of the backdoor is also vulnerable. So the guy who actually is orchestrating this bunch of those compromised servers, without the minions knowing that, actually. So we got some access to the master and found out that we were not the only ones. And this is where the active cyber defense part comes in, right? And I'm a big fan of it, but and everything was done in accordance with GDPR, if someone is interested. But there were at least 3 other actors. So I think it's quite a lot for one case, one little case that started off with just one compromised web page. So there were 3 other actors who were orchestrating or seeing at least all the information from hundreds of compromised servers, and they were actually able to orchestrate them as well. They were constantly gathering the information and at least observing what is actually happening there. The interesting part is that in this particular case, almost 200 different servers were reporting, and 4 of them were in internal networks. So apparently they compromised also the perimeter or the other servers in this particular hosting provider. 17 of those backdoor servers are accessed only once. So we noticed that there might be a weird approach of those hackers, or maybe they're script kiddies, I don't know. They just use it. They just use the functionality of the web shell just for the first compromise, and drop some other files, and then they go away without even taking care of this web shell. So they just drop it and access it only once. As I mentioned before, apparently some AV techniques or technologies or solutions on server side are effective, because so a couple of cases we saw that by accessing the web shell on the compromised machine, there's this notification that there's a malicious activity detected, there's some kind of a Trojan, and apparently it's an AV solution that is dropping this out. Some other findings that, or statistics, if you will, and also they are indicating a bad OPSEC at their side, which is good for good guys. I mean, I'm not trying to show off that here you see that they are lame, but it's good for good guys that we can know how they operate. We know that they doing not the best job possible, and it's easier for us to make the world a little bit better place, right? Here we can see that from the analyzed compromised systems, we have gathered password hashes for those backdoors, and you can see that in green, those green are already cracked, freely available online, and in 100 cases, in 100 compromised servers, the same password was used. So again, huge code reuse, right? They trust, for some reason, that stuff. And TLD statistics, which are not really useful, but still, obviously, .com is the most popular there. So returns, we also tried to find how often they return to the web shell, and these are not 100% accurate statistics, because we were able to monitor it for about 2 or 3 weeks, and they might be able to return later. So this is a short time span, but still, they do not return quite frequently to that. Apparently, they again use this code to do some first work, maybe backdoor it differently, or leave some malicious content or phishing or whatever, and just drop the web shell there, right? But the trick is that the guy who is actually orchestrating the backdoor, he sees it all. He's able to return at any time and do whatever he wants. So some conclusions from our side on this research. Code reuse is inevitable, like I mentioned before, also for good guys, and I guess it's how we live nowadays, and we should learn from these cases. We should understand how we could avoid being minions, like those script kiddies or hackers. I don't know who they are, but obviously someone is able to control it all. And in our daily lives with code reuse, we also have to be very careful. And I'm not advising that we shouldn't do that, but we should be careful and evaluate the risks and do our best trying to evade them. And also, just a simple resource audit sometimes help. I mean, there are cases where a domain name is abandoned, right? You had a domain name, maybe you have hundreds of them. You hosted a project or I don't know, snippets of code, and now you just abandon it. Someone, maybe hundreds of people related to that piece of code, and now you just drop it off, and someone eventually will take it. And there are tons of cases where, also with legitimate repositories on GitHub, where people are developing some stuff, they get rid of it for some reasons, sometimes understandable reasons, and they just delete the repository. Someone else creates it with the same code, just with additional juicy stuff, and no one notices that. And all the people, this is where the name of my presentation is justified, right? Building an efficient backdoor distribution system. It's all of us with code reuse if it's done without careful thinking. And the same applies for plugins, like for WordPress. There are tons of WordPress themes out there available on the internet that are free for download. It works out of the box. It looks perfect, and the difference is that there's this code spray, which is used by someone else. So you are a minion in that particular time if you don't pay attention. Some AV solutions, they work, so don't lose your faith on that. I think the SynSite is just a very tip of the iceberg that actually is happening there with this with these backdoor techniques, and in both cases, the legitimate or more or less legitimate code and the backdoor arena as such. All the findings that we gathered, we didn't try to bring any of those machines down or do any active stuff further. We notified all the certs involved, so CERT community is informed about those compromised machines, and hopefully they will fix some problems with that. So just to wrap it up, code reuse, libs, plugins, dependencies, think about that. If you have been developing something, making it available for the public, and now you decide to drop it off, think it through. If you have a GitHub account and somebody actually is getting the code from it, and you don't have time to maintain it, don't delete it. Just take out the content and leave the repository alive. Some commercial plugins for teams like WordPress, like I mentioned, there are reasons behind that, the fact that they are commercial. So if they are freely available, probably you are the product. So take care, be safe. I hope you liked it.
Maybe there are some questions. Maybe. Anyone? Kaur, you promised a question, but you're asleep. Okay. I have a... Oh, Carlos has a question. Go ahead.
Varis, what if there is a medical device?
Yeah. What if there's a medical device? Sometimes you just have to take the risk, I guess.
I have two questions written down. I just have to look at them. So when you were tracking back, did you find multiple puppet masters, or that's just the one who holds the key to all of them?
Multiple, as I mentioned in the presentation, in that one case where we found the master and we were able to access the backend, there were 3 other actors orchestrating it, or at least gathering information. So it's a Wild West.
Right. I mean, the follow-up question would be, how would you track the real source back? Because they might be accessing it from their own covered infrastructure, and tracking back might not be so easy without some active engagements. How would you track that?
I guess you have to spend a little bit more time to understand who is actually more active and behind that, and dig even deeper. And if you take a look on the researches regarding the APT, Advanced Persistent Threat cases, every now and then you can see that there, from the good guys, there are a couple of actors already on the case, and sometimes they interfere, which is, again, interesting artifact, right? So I guess it's time.
And I would be assuming that the adversaries who are backdooring the backdoors or releasing code publicly for the backdoors which are backdoored, they would assume that there would be someone pursuing them back. So, and you mentioned they are making some OPSEC fails. However, they might implement some security measures for that as well.
Right, and sometimes, like with this WSOShell, you see that it didn't took a lot of time to understand that the information is being dispatched to mail@mail.ua, and I would say it's quite brutal, or just acting like that in plain sight. I mean, I'm not sure whether it's actually those guys from Mail.ru or just someone is putting this information there just to, I don't know, drop a joke or whatever, but it's definitely worth the research.
Right, and we might not know who is in the end. Maybe it's a governmental institution who's in charge of it.
It's better to know that there's something happening that maybe we don't get the answer right away.
Any more questions? There's a question.
Hello. You mentioned in your presentation that you were monitoring the backdoors. And my question is, are you allowed as a CERT to take down those backdoors? Or do you communicate with other CERTs? Or you are just allowed to monitor them? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Of course, there's a legislation, and in Latvia we have IT security law, and it states that CERT can also disconnect the infected resources if necessary. Usually, in such cases, we coordinate the resolution of the incident in cooperation with other CERTs, other countries, the CERT community as such, and in most cases it works. For example, with compromised Soho routers, those incidents that you probably have heard of lately, it takes a lot of time. The involvement of other involved parties are not so straightforward and fast, because usually it's the name itself stands for Soho, right? It's a small office or home where somebody has to react in their home, so it's a general user in most cases. But if we talk about server technologies, it's more efficient. So yeah, we notified all the CERTs in those countries where the servers were compromised, and to my knowledge, almost all of them are now cleaned and the backdoors are not there.
Maybe there are some more questions. If not, then again, applause to Varis.
Thank you.